So our thought today is like a good neighbor. Thank you, Brian, for that song. I read the words of that song, and the part where if we just talk of doing good, but don't walk through our neighborhoods. And then I read this scripture where the young lawyer asked very arrogantly, because he knew everything, you know those kind, they have all the knowledge in the world and they're waiting to rub your face in it. And this is what he was doing with Jesus. He felt like he had the correct interpretation and he was trying to trip this teacher up. So who's my neighbor? And Jesus told the story of the Samaritan who did good to the Jewish man who had been overtaken by bandits on the road. I think we all have memories of neighbors. Some are recent, some are in our past. Good neighbors and bad. You know the good neighbors. When we bought our home, we had a wonderful neighbor. I love remembering him. When we didn't have our lawnmower, he made sure the grass was cut so the neighborhood looked good. And then when I watered my grass, I watered his. We took care of each other. Like good neighbors do. When I was a child and there was a death in the family or family members descended upon us like locusts, there was always the neighbor. You know the one. There was always a neighbor who would come with a casserole. Or someone who would corral the children while the adults were talking. Because see, in my day, children didn't talk when grown folks were talking. They didn't sit in their conversations. But this is a different day. So anyway, I'm trying to get with the times. But the good neighbor was always there to meet the need. Anybody have that? Yes. And I think you all might remember there's a commercial that comes on television. And this particular company promises to be there for catastrophe, death, and mayhem. And what's the song say? And like a good neighbor. There you go. That company is there to meet your need, to take away some of the financial stress of whatever issue you're going through. So, today we're just going to talk about neighbors. The good, the bad, the where you fit in, and what we, MCC, should be doing to be good neighbors.
All right. Say it.
Now, y'all know I get excited. I have a feeling this won't be a real exciting message. Because we don't like having our toes stepped on. So I encourage you to tuck your toes under the seat and just listen prayerfully to what the Spirit has to say to the church. Will you pray with me? Jesus, 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 we thank you for this day. I ask, dear God, that as you breathed upon your disciples and invited them to receive the Spirit of the living God, that you would breathe on us today. Help us to let go of self. Help us to receive what it is you mean to teach us this day. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, and let your people be edified by your word. And we ask in the name of love. Amen. So who is my neighbor, the Jew versus the Samaritan? Okay, there's a little history. The Jews and the Samaritans were of the same family. One branch went north and one branch went south. The Samaritans built their stronghold along this very road where this story takes place. And their capital was considered like a watchtower. They watched out for people as they were passing on the road, and specifically, they watched for enemies. So when the Jewish people were taken into captivity, the rightful Jews, you know, the good people, the ones that were doing everything they were supposed to, worshiping the way they were supposed to, and all that kind of stuff, they went one way, and the Samaritans went the other. Now, the man who was left for dead on the road was Jewish. And the Levite and the priest knew he was Jewish because he was laying there naked, and there was a sign that said whether or not they was a Jewish man. And it was exposed. Nonetheless, they passed on the other side because this is a road that's known for being treacherous. A lot of people have fallen prey to bandits on that road and been overtaken and been robbed and left for dead or dead. And so we're going to cut the Levite and the priest a little slack here, because I'm going to ask you to picture yourself driving from DeQuinder on 8 Mile, going west. And you stop right there at John Iron 8 Mile, and you see somebody who looks like you laying in the median. Do you stop? I don't want an answer. I just want you to think about it. Is it safe? Would I be hurt if I went to their rescue? Now take that same scenario, and you're driving down Main Street to Washington. So do those to connect? Main and, okay, thank you, help me out. You're driving right there, and you see a person who looks like you. They're on the side of the road. Do you stop? What's the criteria for stopping? A lot of times, it's what's in our heart, what's been planted deep inside that we didn't plant there, that keeps us from reacting to people, because the person on John Iron 8 Mile is as much your neighbor as the person on Main and Washington. If one deserves your mercy and your assistance, so does the other. So who is my neighbor? I'm going to talk about the Samaritan for a minute, because I like the Samaritan. This is my picture of the Samaritan. The Samaritan shows up in a lavender robe with a lavender head wrap and a gold band, a chartreuse tunic, and a gold cinched waist, sandals studded with brass. Pretty, right? The Samaritans worshiped differently. You know, they had a kind of eclectic worship. You may not know anybody like this. They included everyone. They didn't turn anyone away. They worshiped God, but they appreciated the beliefs of other people. You know anybody like that? So the Jews didn't want to be bothered with them because they weren't the right kind of people. See, the Samaritans were those people. The kinds of people that Mother told you you needed to stay away from. The kinds of people that they beat their sons and daughters to keep them from being like. You know what the Samaritan is. The Samaritan is other. So now the priest and the Levite have gone along and they've seen this guy and they've decided, we're not going over there. But here comes the Samaritan, the one that we say is playing church. Who stops, bandages this person, puts them on their own beast and takes them to get some care. Now, today we have the Good Samaritan laws that say that you can render care to someone without getting into legal trouble for it. Because yes, there was a time when you could help someone out and they'd sue you because a rib was broken. But okay, you can help them now without it. So we see people in hurricanes, we see people in disasters, we see people in tornadoes helping their neighbors out. Why? Because there's a code that if I help you out of this situation, you're not going to come from my house and children. They didn't have that code then. The Jewish community was not going to have anything with the Samaritan, and the one who gave aid was the one that the Jews didn't like. Now, I'm struck by this particular thing in the young lawyer's answer. Jesus said, "Who was the neighbor?" And the young attorney said, "The one that showed mercy, the one that gave aid." Did you notice he wouldn't even use the word Samaritan in his answer? So deep was the hatred that I can't say LGBTQI. I can't say black. I can't say those people, because that will show up in who I am, and you'll feel it. So I'm not going to do that. But this Samaritan put himself in harm's way to save a stranger. God said to the prophet Samuel, "I want you to go down and I want you to pick somebody out for me to anoint as king," back in the Old Testament. And as Samuel was going, he looked at Jesse's wonderful strapping sons, and God said, "Don't look on their appearance.
Right. That's right.
I don't want you to pay attention to how they look or how they dress or where they worship or any of those things, because you're looking at the outward appearance, but I'm looking at the heart. I can handle the person that's on the inside. All I want is the body to show up in my state so I can work in, with, and through them." At the beginning of chapter 10, Jesus sent his disciples out. And he wanted them to spread the good news, heal the sick, bring peace to the people that they encounter, set the captives free. And he said to them, if they accept you, well and good. That's a great thing. But if they don't accept you, shake the dust off your feet. Don't let their negative behavior cling to you. Yes, you might be that Jewish person that's living just upright. You might be that Catholic person that's living just upright. You might be that Protestant person that's living just upright. But don't you allow hatred and malignity of your fellows to cling to you and make you treat other people as other. Be a good neighbor. Do as much good as you can, for as many as you can, for as long as you can, without regard to their person.
Say it.
It's not your decision whether that person on the corner with the sign is going to take your money and get drunk or high.
That's right.
What you have in your pockets, my love, is not yours. It was a gift from the eternal God for you to be a benefit to somebody else. Y'all don't like me this morning, but it's the truth anyhow.
Say it. I like it.
Recently, I saw on the news where a delegation of congresspersons went down to the border to see how we, the people, were treating those people. They witnessed the children sleeping on the dirt floors or the concrete blocks. They witnessed the people in cages in the hot sunlight, worse than we treat our dogs. They talked about the woman in their interviews who had been interviewed and said that she was told to drink from the toilet because there was no running water. Now we talk about Flint, and rightly so. We poisoned a whole community. But down there we are willingly turning a blind eye to the fact that we have human beings living in cages and we're not providing the very basic necessities of life. These elected officials expressed their disdain for the unjust inhumane treatment of these people who came to what they hoped would be America's open arms and a better life than the one they had run away from in their native countries. These poor, downtrodden, frightened people who had spent whatever meager resources they had to travel from Central America to the United States-Mexican border, armed only with a few possessions, and their children were forced to live in squalor, denied fresh water and food, our southern neighbors. Who's the good neighbor here? This land of the free and home of the brave, where in the New York harbor stands a statue that says, "Give me your poor. Give me those who are burdened. Give me those who are looking for a better way to live." And we've decided to build a wall. Here, these poor people are received as criminals, called animals, separated from their children and spouses, and forced to live in squalor. I think about World War II, when the Japanese American citizens of this country had their properties taken and were forced to live in cages and prison compounds in the desert. I think about the American natives who were raped, poisoned, murdered, robbed, and forced to walk from one side of the country to the other and given a desert to live in. I ain't gonna go there with my folks. Y'all heard about that in February. But lest you forget, there was a boat that brought children here to work as field animals, to be raped and starved and imprisoned. But that was okay, because the law said that was right. You see, the law says it's right to punish people. It's only wrong to try and free them. The law says apartheid is right, but fighting against apartheid is illegal. Is that twisted?
Yes.
When during World War II, we'll stick with that thing for a minute, there were German citizens that came to this United States after the war, and nobody put them in a cage to find out if they happened to be the individuals who were using children as guinea pigs. The inhumane treatment of other humans. Like a bad neighbor. These Congresspeople who went to our southern border came and saw what was going on, and they shook their heads, and they gave wonderful speeches about how horrible it was, and they turned around and they went back to Washington and left them in their cages, sleeping on the dirt floors without running water. And it broke my heart. Jesus said, "For as much as you didn't do it for the least of these, you didn't do it for me. I was sick, hungry, naked, imprisoned, and you didn't take care of me. I was sleeping on concrete blocks, and I was taken from my mother, and you said nothing about it." And the disciples said, "Well, when did we do all this?" When you didn't do it for the ones in the margin, you know, the ones that you think are other, you didn't do it for me. Okay, so I told you about my good neighbors. Cut the grass, keep my packages when UPS dropped it off. They left. In moves the bad neighbors. The first group was good. They kept the lawn, they even kept their kids. But John, my good neighbor, liked to listen to smooth jazz. He liked to listen to Motown oldies, all the wonderful soul music from the 70s and 80s. I could get with John. He was the boy. We barbecued and shared with each other. It was a wonderful thing. So these blessed new people, you have to call things that be not as though they were. These are wonderful people. They moved in with their little apple dumplings, and they like listening to rap, loud and often. If you like rap, God bless you, but it's not my genre of music. And I try to keep my classics to a minimum, so I don't have to force you to listen to what Vivaldi is doing. Right? But they weren't like that. So they moved out, and then the next group moved in, and they were worse than the group before. These were the ones, you know about them. Their kids are all over your grass, killing what you've planted, pulling up your flowers by the root. If UPS leaves a package, you can be sure you'll never see it. That's who moved in next. Bad neighbors, the ones who are out to get us. Recently, you know, we were down in Florida, and we had a wonderful time. It was a beautiful, beautiful experience going down there. The week started with people at each other. And Spirit does what Spirit does.
Amen.
And although they intended evil, God turned that thing around and meant it for good. And by the end of the week, those enemies had become good neighbors. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. You've heard about them inviting all the transgender to the podium, and they sat there and filled the ranks, and it was glorious and heart-wrenching. It was beautiful to see all the different flavors of the metropolitan community churches from across the globe coming together to celebrate a living and loving God together. It was a wonderful thing. However, we are people, are we not? And we're going to behave the way we behave. So I happened to have a discussion with a friend of mine while we were down there. And we were discussing a mutual acquaintance and trying to decide which box to put this person in. Because we have our own isms, schisms, prejudices, right? If you say you don't, you better look in the mirror again. Because we all have some. So we regurgitated our personal bigotries and bigotries, and finally another friend stepped in and pulled the cover off of our misbehavior, our judgmental behavior, and helped us to see that this is what we're called to do. We are called to love and accept each other without prejudice, period.
Amen. Amen. Say it.
Blue hair may not be for me, but Chloe looks good in it. You understand what I'm saying? We're not called to judge. I heard some good old church folks saying years ago, well, I'm just a fruit inspector. Well, darlings, you're not called to inspect the fruit in anybody's vineyard but your own.
That's right.
I've got grapevines and you got apple trees. Concentrate on your apples and make sure the worms don't get in there. Stay out of my grapevines. So there we were trying to decide which one of our isms fit this individual. And our friend said, check yourself. I love the story that was told about the meeting where the saints came in carrying mirrors. And as they sang Michael Jackson's song, I'm starting with the man in the mirror, they showed us ourselves. There's a time in everyone's life when we ought to stand boldly in the mirror. We should accept every opportunity for someone to pull the cover off our mess, because you don't know your mess is there if you're blinded to it.
That's right.
And we can't repair what's wrong until we know it's wrong. Okay, move on, Hattie. Our isms keep us from loving others to life, like weeds in our garden that choke out our beautiful plants. Our disdain for others in our lives mars the service of love that we give to keep us from truly being the body of Christ in this world. Now, I told you about the congresspersons that went down there. I also read a letter written by the Reverend Dr. James Dobson. He's the head of a Christian organization called Focus on the Family. His is particular families, but okay, focus on the family. He toured the same southern border. And what he saw was in line with what the congressperson saw. But his response to what he saw was in line with what DJT says about these people. Now, though Dr. Dobson speaks for thousands of fundamentalist Christians, though he is the voice for fundamentalist Christianity, instead of taking this opportunity to speak to bad behavior, he agreed that these were criminals, animals, and all they needed was to be locked away like that and shipped back off somewhere. And I was outraged. The psalmist in our lessons today wrote, God, teach me to be fair and righteous. I believe that we can only understand fairness and righteousness when we've been exposed to unfairness, injustice, and unrighteousness. And we don't need a whole lot to show us these things. When someone exposes our isms and we own it and work to change it, then that's when we get a better understanding. That's when Spirit works with us. When we're honest enough to say, gee whiz, I've got broke toes, I need to fix them. I can't be bigoted because I have these people in my family, those people in my neighborhood, some of them are even in my church. I can't be bigoted. I can't be filled with hatred because I've talked to those people in the grocery store. Some of my best waitresses look just like that. When we start justifying who we are instead of actually looking at who we are, that's the problem in our life. Jesus said, I was hungry, sick, naked, and imprisoned, and you didn't take care of me. I'm going to read some statistics for you. More than 300 families in America are in mourning just since the 1st of July. There have been more than 324 deaths by guns since the 1st of July. More than 20 transgender deaths have occurred since January. More than. Almost all of them African American women.
That's right.
The Trump administration has made it the plan for this weekend to find and deport 1 million people. Last year, ICE removed 250,000 people. 2,500 children were separated from families prior to the reversal of the Family Separation Act. 700 were separated from their families since that policy was reversed. Many of these children were kept longer than the 72 hours allowed by law. 700 of them were kept from 36 to 75 days, and more than 50 of them have been held for over a year. And some of them, they don't know where their parents are now. Good neighbors, peacemakers, salt of the earth. At our general conference, the Reverend Elder Cecilia Eccleston's sermon was entitled, Church, Are You Coming or Not? She said in her sermon that it's time for MCC to return to its root of active involvement in movements to bring healing, inclusion, and trust to a hurting world. And it's not just enough for us to shake our head and say, how sad. I hear people saying sometimes, somebody ought to do something. The government ought to do something. But in the United States, we are a government of, by, and for the people. So we are that government. We are that somebody that can do something. We need to find someone who can speak to the situation that's happening on our southern border and do something about it. See, we've all come into this place where we're that acceptable norm now. It's okay for us to get married now. They've kind of decided, all right, we're not getting rid of them. We might as well let them have some of their rights. So they've given us the right to step into normal society. But at the same time, we need to be looking back at the others that are still on the margin and bringing them over so that they can be part of normal society. See, part of our mission is inclusion. It's not just enough to have a lovely church where we can jump and shout and talk about how good God is and have communion and go home. We're supposed to be doing something. You are the salt of the earth. A city set on a hill. You're supposed to be the example. We are supposed to be the example. We are supposed to be the good neighbor that puts our life on the line for somebody else. I'm almost finished, y'all. I don't have to be mad too much longer. As Reverend Cecilia said, if we wait to deal with hatred, bigotry, and all the isms when we're confronted with them in our church, it's too late.
There you go.
When we're waiting for someone to come into our fellowship with a loaded gun, it's too late. When we're waiting for someone to plant a bomb because they know we worship here, it's too late. We have to deal with isms, unequal justice, false imprisonment now, before we have to personally deal with it. We must be the good neighbor, seeking to find the way to include all of those left out. There's an African phrase called Sankofa. Everyone reach back and bring somebody else along to where you are. We must bring to the fire all those who sit outside the camp in the cold so that they can be warm and not build walls to keep them out. We must be willing to put ourselves in harm's way for love's sake. I think of the scenes of the neighbors helping neighbors during the floods and hurricanes, working together to build sandbag dams to try to keep the water away from other people's property, like good neighbors. I think about the scenes that I saw where people made a human chain to go and rescue someone in flood-ravaged Texas, like a good neighbor. The Samaritan stepped out of his comfort zone and put himself in harm's way for the good of someone he did not know. His was the same behavior that Jesus exhibited. When Jesus stepped out of glory into human form, took on this life of flesh and blood, and then gave it up for our sake. The Apostle Paul wrote this: anyone who hates their brother cannot say they love God. And Jesus said, there is no greater love than to lay down your life for others. Amen.
Amen.